Hey everyone, this is Comix Crazy House, and welcome one and all to this very special presentation of the Incredible Hulk 388, the infamous HIV/AIDS issue. We're going to be getting into it today, and let me do a little preface before we start here, alright? I'm not making fun of anyone who has HIV or AIDS, okay? Yes, that is a very serious thing. If I do make fun of anything in this review, I am making fun of the time period where there was so much hysteria around this issue. Okay, so let's get that straight. Not making fun of you or anyone that you know, because I've had family members and friends who have this disease. I've had a very close cousin who was like my best friend growing up who has died from this disease. I am not making fun of AIDS or HIV. So that's what we're going to be doing today, folks. The Incredible Hulk issue 388. And what's interesting about this issue is actually a filler issue in between two story arcs. So we just had an issue of the Hulk trying to save a young man who will become a dictator in the future. That was the last story arc. And we're moving into the arc of War and Pieces that will be coming after this issue. And what's interesting is a lot of times when you have a fill-in issue like this, the main artist is not the one that works on it, but we still have the same classic creative team working on this fill-in issue. So you get the great storytelling, the good artwork, and I feel other than the subject matter, I think that is one of the things that has made this memorable even years later. And once again, this was the late 80s, early 90s, so if your comic book wasn't about the war on drugs, the environment, it was probably going to be about the AIDS epidemic. Those were like three big hot button topics that made its way into lots of pop culture, whether it be TV shows, cartoons, and even video games. That was the thing around this time, so that's how it found its way into this Incredible Hulk comic. So let's take a look at the creative team that came up with this classic after school special. Once again on Comix Crazy, we got Peter David doing the writing. We got Dale Keown doing the pencils for the Incredible Hulk. He is my favorite Hulk artist. I might be having a little bit of bias because he is the one that I started out with, but even looking back and looking at all the Hulk artists throughout time, he's the one that I like the most. And Dale Keown's pencils are embellished by Mark Farmer. And we got Glynis Oliver doing the colors and Joe Rosen doing the letters. So let's go peel open Hulk 388 and see the story that unfolds in our flip through and review. All right, folks, here we are with Incredible Hulk 388, and it's all great. Let's start out by taking a look at the cover first, and we see that the Hulk is in some pain right here in the foreground, and he's holding his arm. You can see that he's bleeding, and he's being attacked by the villain that will be introduced in this book, and that is Speed Freak. We can almost say that Speed Freak is the physical villain and the physical antagonist, but the real villain in this story is probably going to be intolerance and fear, but we'll get to that as we get there. And in the background, you can see Jim Wilson and Rick Jones trying to run and try to help their buddy the Hulk, and you can also see that Wilson is actually bleeding from his chest. That's what that black spot is, you know. This is about as violent as a cover you could get during this time, because we're still dealing with the comics code. So you can't have overt violence in comics, but they found ways to get around it. Anytime there's any type of blood splatter or blood splash, they color it with just black ink. And the Hulk, of course, his can be green because he is green. So they got away with showing the Hulk's blood in this book in that way. But overall, a cool cover. It gets both the hero and the new villain right there up front, and you can see the danger that the villain possesses, the fact that he's coming at the hero with his blades out, and you're kind of wondering what's going on with this character because he doesn't look that big, but he still looks threatening. You know, the Hulk is huge, so you would expect that a villain or an antagonist that was fighting the Hulk would be as big as him, but you got Speed Freak, who's a lot smaller, but you can see he's just as deadly because he has the cybernetic armaments and he also has these extremely sharp swords, and they're coming directly at our hero. So our book starts out with a splash page of some mobsters, you know, just going out for a jog. You know, even guys in organized crime got to stay in shape. And in the background, if you look very closely, you can see that our villain is coming towards them. So you can see Speed Freak, and he's kind of making a sound as he's kind of pushing his way through the air here. And our mobsters seem to be completely unaware that they are in extreme danger. So we flip to the next page and we see Speed Freak, but we don't really see him. So he has not had a full reveal yet, but we kind of see his strobe just going by. And you know, the mobsters, at least his bodyguards, notice that there's something weird going on, and they can hear this weird sound, but they don't know exactly where it's coming from. And they try to protect their boss, but Speed Freak is way too fast for that. And I like the way that this looks here, because this is actually Speed Freak in a first-person perspective, so we're seeing from his perspective. And you can see, like, the shape of the panel has actually taken on the shape of his goggles. And they're moving in closer and closer to his target. He extracts his blades and he goes right in for the bodyguard first, stabbing him through. And that's where we see the black blood that I was talking about on the cover. You know, we can't have red blood because that would be just too much and too gory for teenagers at this time. But the black blood gives you a good enough inclination as to what's going on. So one bodyguard goes down. The second one goes down, and Speed Freak goes by super fast on the mob boss, and we can only see his head right here. And he's thinking, like, why is my throat so sore? And we see that his head has been cut off. So take notes to you guys out there. If you're working on a comic book that is for a more mainstream audience, maybe you want to showcase violence, this is kind of the way to do it, where you're showing the violence, but you're leaving a lot to the imagination, so that way you keep your job, you don't get in trouble, but you're also doing something cool and in an artistic way. Cut to our next scene where Rick Jones meets up with Jim Wilson, and Rick Jones is going to be playing a benefit concert at the community center that Jim Wilson works at. And this is kind of like a fun meeting. These are two humans who have been entangled in a lot of superhero stuff because they've both been good friends and companions of the Hulk, but they've also been tied into a lot of other characters in the Marvel Universe. Of course, Jim Wilson is actually the nephew, I believe, of Sam Wilson, the Falcon. So that's his connection in the Marvel Universe. But also he was a companion and like a sidekick of the Hulk for a while when Rick Jones was not there. And actually, while doing some research for this particular episode of Comix Crazy, I actually found some pages from Jim Wilson's first appearance with the Hulk. And they make him look like a typical, like, ghetto gang member from the 70s. And of course, he's living in the hood, but he becomes friends with the Hulk. But it's interesting. You can go check it out. I'll post the pencil pictures here so you can see them. But if you want to see them a little bit more, you can look them up on my Patreon. And I'll post the pages there for you guys to download. So as the two are riding along in the car, they're kind of having a conversation, just sort of catching up. And, you know, that's when we get the reveal that Jim Wilson has AIDS.
He's got AIDS!
Because, you know, if you got a black character that grew up in the hood with a hairstyle like that, of course he must have something. So after that startling reveal that Jim Wilson is HIV positive, we cut to a scene of the Hulk and the Pantheon kind of preparing for a war in Trans-Sabal. The main reason I wanted to showcase these pages is just because of the artwork. I'm a big fan of both Dale Keown and Mark Farmer, so I wanted to showcase some of the artwork that they put in here. I think this looks cool with the Pantheon and the Hulk kind of looking over their little diorama of the country they're getting ready to invade, basically. And of course, you got like the little computer panels in the background and these characters being lit from the bottom. think it looks really cool, like a good war room scene that you would see in typical sci-fi or any type of military movie. So the next scene we cut to is actually, we get to see Speed Freak in his civilian gear, and he's meeting with the person who hired him to go out there and kill the person that he feels is hurting his son. So there's a wealthy businessman. His son also is sick and has AIDS, and he feels that there's a person responsible for that, and the person he holds responsible is his son's boyfriend. So this guy, he hires Speed Freak to go out there and get revenge on the person who hurt his son. So back with Rick and Jim, we get back to the community center and we see Rick getting introduced to some of the other patients that live at this community center and that Jim works with. And, you know, we get some very 90s scenes of Rick being a little bit scared to shake hands with the HIV patient.
Give him the facts, coach.
You can't get AIDS from casual contact. Hugging, touching, they're okay.
Like I mentioned in the intro, this was a whole genre of content during this time period because people were very unsure about both HIV and AIDS, and we didn't have the education that we have about it now. And there were people out there that were literally afraid to touch somebody who might be infected with the AIDS virus. And they kind of get into that here in this book, and we see that through the eyes of Rick Jones, who is extremely paranoid and nervous around people who have the virus. So that's when Rick and Jim get alone in Jim's office, and Rick Jones is being a little bit of a prima donna here, doing a little bit of playing the victim in this situation because, you know, his friend has told him that he has AIDS, but his friend does not seem to be as worried about it as Rick is. Jim even tells Rick about how his girlfriend left him after he got his diagnosis.
You raggedy bitch.
And Rick is feeling like, you know, this must suck for you and life really sucks. But Jim is kind of look at it in a more positive fashion and thinking that, well, at least I'm alive and I have some life to live. So this is where we get to the main action of this book. Rick is on stage playing the benefit concert. All the patients are coming in. All the people from the community center are coming in, having a great time. And Speed Freak decides to mess it all up. He burst onto the scene with his rocket boots. And I like this panel. This is where we get to see him in all of his glory. As Speed Freak jumps in, he zooms through the crowd and he comes up to Rick Jones and asks for his autograph because apparently he's a fan of Rick Jones. And at that very moment that he realizes he's a fan and got the autograph, he thinks that the autograph will go up in value if it's the last autograph of Rick Jones. So he decides to try and kill him. And that's when the blades come out. Very cool shot, by the way, of him, you know, igniting his blades here and trying to stab Rick Jones. But Rick Jones uses that guitar to block the blow. And I like that Rick Jones is no slouch. He doesn't just sit there and just wait to be killed or wait to be rescued by the Hulk. He actually tries to fight back. So he used that guitar to block the blade and throws a nice little knee shot right into Speed Freak. So that's when Speed Freak actually remembers that he actually has a job to do, and he decides to go after the person he was hired to kill. Rick Jones tries to step in, but Speed Freak does a kind of swirl around, turn around slash, and it winds up cutting Rick right on his hands. Very deep cuts, by the way. That's going to come into play in a few minutes. Because while Rick is sitting there holding his hands and being hurt, that's when Jim Wilson decides to try to step in. Just like any good black character, he decides to step in and saves some of the other characters from assault by the villain or the monster, and he winds up getting stabbed himself. And right before Speed Freak can finish him off, that's when our hero, the Hulk, jumps in. So what's cool about having Speed Freak as an antagonist is the fact that obviously he's not as strong or as powerful as the Hulk, so we had to give him a different type of foil or a different type of gimmick. And in this is the fact that he's super fast, he has these metal blades and also these metal barbs that are actually tipped with adamantium. So of course they're able to pierce the skin of the Hulk. And one barb actually goes into his leg and gets stuck there. And that's when Speed Freak decides to drag the Hulk with this adamantium whip. And he drags him out of the building, through the wall, and into the parking lot. The Hulk's healing factor has already caused his skin to actually heal up around this barb, and he realizes it's going to hurt a lot when he pulls it out, but he needs to pull it out so he can stop being dragged by Speed Freak. So he pulls out the barb, we see him scream in pain, and that's when another barb goes right around the Hulk's neck. And the Hulk seems to be having trouble here. You know, the fact that he is super strong, he's super fast himself, but he's still having trouble dealing with this particular enemy based on his speed and his skills. So as Hulk and Speed Freak are fighting outside, we see where Rick has his after-school special dilemma, where, you know, we saw that he was slashed on his hands and that he's bleeding from his wounds, and Rick wants to help, but he looks at his hands and realizes, I got an open wound, Jim's got an open wound.
Get him out of here! He's got AIDS!
Let me go run and get help. They really didn't need to go that route. I mean, this is something that even whether Jim had HIV or not, if you have any paramedics or anybody that's helping someone who's bleeding, you kind of want to be very cautious, especially if you have an open wound yourself. But on the same page, we finish off the action where Speed Freak is trying to get the Hulk. He winds up slashing a fire hydrant and getting stuck in that position somehow or other, like he's kind of dancing or kind of getting rolled around on the water spouting from the hydrant. And that's when the Hulk hits him with a Hulk-sized punch. So Speed Freak was basically standing still long enough for the Hulk to get a hit on him, and Hulk knocks him into the air, Looney Tunes style. And we see him fly straight up and go all the way into the air. And in typical comic book fashion, we're not concerned where he lands or where he goes. That's just it for Speed Freak at the end of this issue. So that's when the Hulk comes back to help. He sees Rick hesitating and is wondering what is going on. And Rick lets the Hulk know that, hey, Jim is HIV positive. So the Hulk says, don't worry about it. These gamma rays make sure that I'm immune to any type of disease like AIDS. And he picks Jim up and jumps him to the hospital. And that's when we discover that the young man that Rick met earlier has passed away right there during all the commotion at the concert.
Well,
Now, this final page is interesting because it seems like they tried to cram a lot into the last page of this issue. Like, this seems like there should be 2 different pages, but they crammed it all into one final page, and that is showcasing the wealthy CEO and the father of the young man who just passed away. And, you know, he's the one that hired Speed Freak, and the Hulk and Rick Jones were able to get his confession on tape. So they're going to give that to the police, and this guy is basically going to go to jail for hiring a methed out murderer to kill his son's boyfriend. And the second ending is where we get to see that Betty confesses to Bruce that she still has feelings for him, and he lets her know that he'll always be there for her like he's always there for his friends. And that's when she finally decides to get close to him and give him a kiss on the cheek, just showcasing that she's not as afraid of him as she was in the last few issues. So there you have it, folks. The Incredible Hulk, issue 388. A special issue giving you guys some education on HIV and AIDS.
deal with the real people. Get the facts.
So I hope you all enjoyed this one. This one I had a lot of fun with in reviewing as well as just rereading this particular story. And I hope you'll all join me here next time for Comix Crazy. We're going to be doing a comic that is near and dear to my heart, The Adventures of Bayou Billy. Yes, that Bayou Billy, the one from the video game, actually had a comic book series back in the day, and your boy bought a certain issue, and it was a big inspiration for me as an artist and animator even till today. So that's what we'll be looking at next week. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to this channel so that you're here when I upload new content. Make sure you go ahead and like this video and go ahead and share it with anyone out there who enjoys this type of comic book nostalgia content. And if you want to support the channel, go ahead to my website at chriscrazyhouse.net. Lots of great products there. My own comic books and coloring books are on sale. Or you can become a Patreon of Comix Crazy. Full unedited episodes are there and available to download, as well as exclusive content that doesn't make it here to YouTube. Just follow the link in the description box in the comments section, pick a tier, and enjoy at Comix Crazy on Patreon. Thank you all for joining me here, and I'll be seeing you on the next episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comix Crazy. Peace.